Welcome to the podcast Eternal, where we'll be reviewing biblical studies, theology, news of the day from a Christian point of view, and no politics. I'm your host, David Gear, former Assembly of God minister and author of the book Eternal and subsequent sequel, Resistance. Thank you for joining me. So, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the essential resource and power that is prayer. That's going to be our main topic for today. I also want to mention, as usual, as always, this will be, as all previous podcast episodes that I've been doing, this will be unscripted. So, except for references, biblical references as such, and so I just want to make that known right off the bat. And it's, as usual, it's me, just me talking about this today. So I want to get into this right off the bat. What brought you here already, I'm assuming, is that you saw the clip that I posted on TikTok about this. And to me, it's more than important, it's essential. And sometimes we don't always know how to pray, what to pray. I mean, the when is never usually the question. It's not the question even that new believers have. I think even looking back on my own life when I first came to know Jesus in high school, and even when I rededicated my life to Him, I never questioned about when it was the time to pray, or it's how to pray. That's really the question often when you're first beginning, when you're first starting. And a lot of people will say, that if you're a Christian, you're part of a religion, or they'll say you're part of a cult, you're part of, if you're close to Jesus and you pray a lot, that you're a fanatic. You'll hear words like that from people. Usually those people, they don't fully understand. They're coming from a place where they have never truly had a relationship with Jesus. They've never had a relationship with God, which is a two-way street. And I'm not so much looking into getting into the basics of prayer. My goal today, what I wanted to talk about today, was prayer in hard times. So that's not just generalized prayer 101, but it is prayer that is specific, because we know it's obvious when we're going through hard times that, maybe even more obvious that we need to pray. Of course, we need to pray every day, and we need to be in God's presence as often as we possibly can. But it is very important, prayer in trials will test your prayer life, but it also tests your, it's important to know, especially as a new believer, and you may become more acquainted with this and understand it as you get closer to Jesus and you walk with Him through multiple trials and through many things. And as I mentioned on the TikTok before, you will go, if you're not going through something right now, and we are all in a time that's difficult. Okay, the last 5 years, no one has to tell you. I mean, quite frankly, most of us are tired of hearing about how rough a time that we're in. Yes, everyone, you know, I'm sure you don't want to hear that anymore, even from me, coming from me. But if you're listening to this now, you're curious and wondering, okay, yes, this is a rough time. But we want to focus on the positives. We want to focus on not the difficulty, or as a Christian, you would say you want to focus on the storm. You want to focus on Jesus. You want to focus on God. You want to get closer to him. And in the storm, he will prove himself not only to you, but to others. And so right off the bat, I want to talk about a few key points here, is that accessing God's strength. So I'm going to lay down some verses here that are very important. So key anchors here for your prayer life in tough times. The Bible teaches that in our weakness, God's strength is made perfect. So prayer always allows us to tap into the divine. So his strength is made perfect in my weakness, my weaknesses, and other people seeing that I'm weak and not knowing how I'm making it through, but the evidence being God that they can't deny. So me being weak is a good thing, right? I have no strength of my own, and any strength that I do have didn't come from me. It came from God, and if it isn't God's strength, then it is strength, man-made strength that would be prideful, and it fails, but God's strength doesn't fail. So I'm going to throw out this verse right now, 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9 through 10. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses. So, if I shout my weakness, he can proclaim his strength. Because no one would look to me for that strength. No one would look to me to get them out. Also that I can't say that I did it myself and everyone is aware of it. Everyone knows it. I have made that mistake before myself. I'm not going to deny it. I have made the mistake of taking credit for getting through things and maybe talking about things that I've gotten through. Even when you're giving your testimony, this can happen. That you give your testimony or you tell someone the things that you've been through, but you leave out what some people in the world would call the punchline. You leave out the whole point, which is you leave out God's name and you leave out Jesus at the end of it. After you've gotten done explaining all the things you got through, you didn't get through them. God got you through them, and that's what people need to know. And I've been guilty of that not even too long ago, about explaining about my time on the street and being homeless and all the things that I went through. And I didn't even go into deep detail. I mean, there are very few people in this world, maybe one or two, possibly only my wife, knows some of the darkest things that happened to me when I was on the street, and I'm not going to share them here either. It's not that I'm ashamed, but it's that's not what this podcast is about. But just to know that I mentioned just the surface stuff, not even bringing that stuff up with this person a few months ago, and this was at work, and yeah. And then I didn't give credit where credit was due. And that is called taking the glory. I know that's a side tangent there just a little bit, but I just wanted to point that out, that in hardships and difficulties, he is strong, and my hope is in his strength. That's where I find any strength is in him. So as a new believer, that's something you want to pray for. You want to pray for God's strength. Also, you want to find peace and comfort. So, and comfort you can go search for other things to find comfort in, but it's not going to do the job. It's going to be temporary. If it does anything and it looks like it's doing something, that is not from God, and it's not going to work, and it's not going to last. It's going to be temporary. But true comfort, true peace comes from God and no one else. It can't come from anywhere else, because all good things come from Him. So one verse I want to point out there: when you pray for God's comfort, pray for His peace. So when difficult times come, we as believers should not be anxious. We look at all the things going on in our world right now, and it's easy to want to be anxious. But I'm telling you, I want to be a voice to say, with Jesus, with God, and if you haven't made that choice and you haven't made Him, the center of your life, that He is the only one that can bring you that kind of peace. When everything around you is falling apart and nothing is making sense, and everything that you knew is changing or has changed, or there's just too much anger and too much hate in the world. That was always there before. We just have a magnifying glass on it now because of the internet and other resources and other things. For one, if you want peace, stay away from maybe having a diet full of that stuff and watching all this stuff, because the more you watch it, the more anxious you're going to be. I'm not saying don't be informed, but there's a point where you're no longer just being informed. You're clinging, and next thing you know, you're thinking with a mind of anxiousness instead of going to Jesus. So the verse there for that one is for peace is Philippians chapter 4, 6 through 7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. So when you request for something, also be thankful. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your heart. It will guard you from being anxious. It keep you from being anxious because you'll be mindful. Your mind will be on the Word of God and God's truth. And when you're in prayer, that's the greatest place to find peace, is in prayer. But remember, when you're praying for that situation, or you're praying just in general during those difficult times, be thankful, look back on and think of the things that God has already done for you. That way you know you have assurance. The evidence is clear based on what God has already done for you. So look back, dig up those moments, that what God has already done, and you knew it was Him. And that will remind you of how, when you're thankful for what you have and you're content, that knowing that what you have came from Him, then you know with assurance that God will see you through this tough time that you're having. Okay, another one here, I'm going to say a good point here is that wisdom is important too. So when you're praying in tough times, you also got to know what to pray, how to pray, guidance in a situation, praying for wisdom. So just like with Solomon, he prayed for wisdom, and God, He saw that, and that it was good, and granted him the wisdom. But see, Solomon didn't just come up with that on his own. When God came to him and asked him to ask for anything and said He would grant it to him. See, it always says He will grant it according to His will. if you seek and ask God for anything, he will not withhold it from you as long as it is in his will. We're not just talking about asking for whatever and you'll get it. But in 1 Chronicles 22:12, King David knew that Solomon was going to build the temple and that David wasn't going to build it. But he prayed for his son Solomon, and he prayed out loud to Solomon. He prayed to God in front of Solomon out loud and asked that he would have wisdom. And so when God came to Solomon later in 1 Kings 3, chapter 3, verse 1 through 15, he recalled the prayer that his father David prayed. He recalled the petition for wisdom. And so it was that recollection. And then God, was truthful and faithful to King David and to Solomon on King David's behalf. So it wasn't just, it was a generational thing. And so, it was great. That was great there, that happened. That was proof of how prayer can transcend generations and time. Even if you're, I know that's going a little deep into the weeds, but it's true. Also, not just guidance, but James, that's another one. James 1:5. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives it generously to all without finding fault. So he will give you wisdom without bringing up your mistakes. So ask him. One more thing, also really important. I should say really the last thing is that you should come to God with gratitude. Remember his faithfulness to you. I know I kind of already mentioned that already. Lamentations is a great one. Chapter 3, verse 21 through 23. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never end. They never come to an end, and they are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. And I say not only is it great, it's perfect faithfulness. It does not fall, it does not fail. And it never has, and it never will. But his love is never ending for you. So hold true to that and know that he is faithful to see you through the trial that you're in. And if you're, like I said before, if you're not in one now, no, you just know that there is one on the horizon. Not to make you leery or again anxious, but just know that there's one in the future eventually. And knowing that he is faithful and remembering his faithfulness will keep you through. So when you pray during difficult times, remember, pray for his strength, peace, and comfort, his wisdom and guidance, and never forget his faithfulness. And so I'm going to leave you with that. I don't want to make this too long. Keep this this podcast episode shorter. Yep. And with that, we will move on in the next podcast. I'll be posting up. I'm hopefully posting that soon. I appreciate that you came here to listen, And if you haven't checked out the other episodes of this podcast, the Eternal Podcast, or if you haven't checked out the website, the Eternal Podcast, or not the Eternal Podcast, sorry, that it's on Spotify as well as YouTube if you haven't seen. But you can find the links to all the social media and all of that, as well as the sci-fi novel Eternal, and information about the sequel Resistance, that you can find at theeternalsaga.com. Thanks again, and God be with you. His comfort and his peace follow you throughout the rest of your day or evening, depending on what time you're listening to this. I pray that God be with you in whatever trial that you're in. I'd just like to make a quick correction there on one of my verses. So I'm going to throw this in. So that verse was actually First Chronicles. It wasn't First Chronicles 22. It was actually First Chronicles 29, where David prayed to God for his son Solomon's wisdom for the future, for the ruler to have wisdom. So I just wanted to correct that because if you were following along with me here a moment ago, and you would have gone to First Chronicles 22, you wouldn't have found what I was referencing. So I just want to make that correction to make sure, it's important to stay accurate. This has been another episode of the Eternal Podcast, and we thank you for your listening and support.